Alright, this is a video in defense of Raymond Pierrehumbert. Raymond Pierrehumbert is a geophysicist professor, and he was formerly at University of Chicago Physics Department, which is a private college, and then he's now at Oxford, at professor of geophysics at Oxford, and he has over 50 peer-reviewed published papers focused on abrupt global warming on Earth. And then he has several other papers on the climates of other planets. So he's the world's leading expert on planetary climate. And his best paper, in my view, is in Physics Today. It is a detailed explanation of the quantum physics origin of abrupt global warming. And essentially, the key consideration is that the global warming is logarithmic, which means that as the CO2 equivalent emissions double, then the temperature on Earth also doubles. And so we started out at about 300 parts per million, and as we go up to 600 parts per million, then that's a 1 degree Celsius increase. And so this will keep doubling as the CO2 equivalent emissions increase. And Raymond Pierrehumbert's big emphasis is that even though 90% or half of the CO2 emissions have been absorbed into the oceans, but when that CO2 is emitted back into the air, it stays in the atmosphere for up to 10,000 years. And so even though even if we stopped emitting CO2 today, we would still have more CO2 being released by the oceans, and 90% of the heat from global warming has also been stored in the oceans, and that will keep emitting. And so Raymond Pierrehumbert has been the biggest critic of what he calls albedo modification, creating a terminal shock. And so I've debated a couple people on YouTube recently who one person said that if we put up the MEERS as the Dr. Tao, the Chinese engineer at Harvard, is advocating what he calls the MEERS project, MEERS, that to accomplish this would cost about $400 billion, and then the MEERS would reflect the solar light and then decrease the warming on Earth. And so this MEERS project has been promoted by former Professor Guy McPherson and others on YouTube, but Guy McPherson's been the main promoter of it. And Raymond Pierrehumbert calls this albedo modification, and he's completely against it because he says that the cause of the problem is CO2 emissions, and so the only way to fix abrupt global warming is to address the cause of the problem. And we've only spent about $400 billion in the U.S. on trying to decrease CO2 emissions. And so if we try to invest $400 billion in the MEERS project as albedo modification, that will detract from any further efforts at decreasing CO2 emissions, and also carbon capture. So he calls this terminal shock. Terminal shock meaning that if we go ahead with the MEERS project as albedo modification, then the amount of CO2 that would be emitted in the meantime would guarantee that any kind of problem in the MEERS project over 10,000 years would immediately cook all life on Earth, because we would be above the 2 degrees Celsius, and in other words, we will have emitted 1 trillion tons of CO2 emissions by the time that the MEERS project is put into place. And so, in defense of the MEERS project, people argue that this, of any technological fix to global warming, this has the least entropy, it requires the least energy use. But the problem, that's not really an accurate way of measuring the success of the MEERS project, because life on Earth is actually based on negative entropy or negentropy from quantum physics. And Raymond Pierrehumbert understands this, since he explains the quantum physics of global warming. So the argument that civilization is a heat engine that increases entropy is still a valid argument, whether it's low entropy or not. It's still entropy. And civilization is only 10,000 years old. But before that, humans were basically just, we still are basically. We're just primates. We think we're extra special because we have missiles and rockets and jets and all that. But we're still really just primates when it comes down to it. And modern humans are essentially the same as chimpanzees using spears. They're just bigger spears that we throw into the air, whether they're rockets or missiles. And so the other argument is that the MEERS project is special because it's MEERS and it's not some kind of sulfur sulfur spray that mimics the aerosol masking effect from pollution. But Professor Raymond Pierrehumbert is clear that the MEERS, that he's talking about albedo modification, and the obviously MEERS are the same thing as the albedo effect, because the albedo effect is literally reflecting sunlight. That's what causes the albedo effect. So like if you go out in the winter time and there's snow everywhere, the bright white makes it like you're looking into a mirror. The sunlight is very bright and reflects back at you, and it can even cause blindness. And so that's exactly what the MEERS are doing. They're reflecting the sunlight as the albedo modification. And so Guy McPherson, he's been quoting Andrew Glickson, the professor in Australia, who says that we've already achieved a heating of watts per meter squared of I think it's like 200 watts per meter squared or something like that, which is the equivalent of already we're at 2 degrees above 2 degrees Celsius in global warming equivalent emissions. But if you read Andrew Glickson, what he's including the albedo, the aerosol masking effect in that calculation. So he considers the sulfur aerosols to be global warming equivalent emissions, because they're covering up the effect of the CO2 emissions. And so the recent analysis of Daniel Rosenfeld and his research team using satellites have shown that the aerosol masking effect is twice as bad as previously thought, so that a 40% decrease in sulfur pollution will heat up Earth another 1 degree Celsius on global average. And this is what Andrew Glickson is referring to when he says that we've already heated up Earth, 2 degrees Celsius. And so it's just another delayed effect, just like the CO2, that 50% of the CO2 is stored in the oceans, and that will be emitted to then increase the heat on Earth, along with the heat being released from the oceans as well. So that's why they say that the effect of the CO2 is delayed by 40 years, that has already been emitted. So what this means is that the Raymond Pierrehumbert, he's written on the aerosol masking effect, but I haven't read all his research on the aerosol masking effect. So of course the problem is that the other argument people say was we cannot decrease CO2 emissions fast enough to save the planet, and therefore we have to put up the MEERS to, but this is the exact opposite of what Raymond Pierrehumbert's arguing. He's saying, look, if we focus on putting up the MEERS, then it's a denial of the cause of the problem, and so we have to double down and focus more on decreasing CO2 emissions. including storing up carbon also. Now, whether this can be done in time, in my view, because of the aerosol masking effect, the effect to switch to renewable energy by decreasing coal power plants will just heat up Earth even more. And in fact, James Hansen, he's sort of like the father of the modern abrupt global warming, ever since he gave a presentation to Congress in 1985 or 1986. He's the NASA scientist, and he says that the current increase in temperature in heating up Earth right now is mainly due to the aerosol masking effect. In other words, because there's been a switch to like decreasing the sulfur pollution from cargo ships, and like cruise ships, and therefore the sulfur has been reduced enough to cause the Earth to heat up even more. So he advocates, well, he doesn't, I don't know what he advocates really, but okay, so the point being that the MEERS project has been thoroughly debunked by Raymond Pierrehumbert, and also that life is from quantum negentropy, or negative entropy, and so just trying to lower entropy is not good enough. And people don't understand, obviously, the gravitational potential as dark energy that is an effect of the reverse time and negative frequency of quantum negentropy or negative entropy. But at least they're acknowledging entropy is the issue, which is a start. And it's really funny because in the so-called dumosphere that I've been participating in, there's no discussion of Raymond Pierrehumbert at all, even though he's literally the top expert on abrupt global warming, the top scientist about it. So, of course, you have to study quantum physics to understand him, because he goes into the frequency, the wavelength of light, and how it's absorbed by the CO2 molecule. And then it's based on the range of the parts per million emission, so that there's a certain range on Earth that causes this logarithmic doubling effect with the temperature on Earth. So he thinks it's possible to decrease the CO2 enough, but if you take into account the East Siberian Arctic shelf methane bomb of the gigatons that